When he turned his back from shoulder to shoulder, it looked like as wide as the tailgate of a truck.
And just darkness, literal darkness, just came like all over, just all over me except where I was standing.
This thing let out the most blood-curdling, mind-blowing, spine-tingling scream that you've ever heard in your life, and it cut through me like a knife.
And I knew that they were going to take me. I just knew it. And then the next thing I can remember is being levitated.
Well, when I look in there, I see two big eyes staring back at me.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Bump Podcast, a place for the believers of the unexplained, monsters, and paranormal. Join us, and we'll go face to face with what goes bump in the night. Hey there, believers. I got a good show for you today. Brian, who was on a previous episode called Bigfoot in West Virginia, is coming back on the show tonight with his buddy Earl, and they're going to talk about their paranormal experiences. They were, for a time, paranormal investigators, and they have some stories they wanted to share, and I'm all about it. We've been doing a run of Bigfoot stuff lately for about a month and a half straight. So we're going to break up the monotony a little bit, and hopefully I won't get another boogeyman in my electronics like what happens in the past. It's been good. My house has not had any activity. I haven't had any EVPs. My speakers haven't been going out. But I haven't been talking about the paranormal. So let's just hope it doesn't happen now that we're, peeking behind that veil again. But let's give it a few seconds, and I'll get Brian on the show. Oh, and while we wait, I want to mention, for those of you that are on Patreon, thank you, by the way. Thank you again. There's some new content on there for you. It's just for you guys. It's a full episode. I did a fireside chat with Dad again. We sat down. We talked about a viral Bigfoot photo that's floating around the internet. We did a little breakdown of that. We talked about the UAP report, and then went down some rabbit holes. It's a lot of fun, so I hope you guys enjoy that. Let me hear something back in the comments. Y'all message me. We talk back and forth a little bit as it is. Those of you that are not members of Patreon yet, it's never too late to join, okay? Everything that's already been posted, as soon as you become a member, you have full access to all of it. So there's 5 tier levels to choose from. It's a lot of fun. I like to post bonus stuff here and there, and you get full video access. So all the interviews that I do that have the video, that goes to Patreon. So it's kind of uncut. You get to see the interaction and all that kind of stuff, kind of a behind the scenes thing. So I hope you all enjoy that. Along with merch that comes out every few months for every member of Patreon, according to their tier level. So get on there, check it out, see what one fits for you. And here's Brian, so let's go ahead and get him on.
Hi, I'm Earl, and this is my friend Brian. I think he's been on the show before already. And I just want to tell you a little bit about how I got started getting interested in the paranormal. My grandmother, Julia, she was, I guess what you would call a would have never thought that, because she was a dyed-in-the-wool Methodist and wouldn't really hear about it, but she believed in everything. And back around this is the story that she told me, back around 1938 in a place called Glenwood Park, which we're not very far from now. We're just about 3 miles from it. It's very different now, but back then it was our family farm pretty much. And everybody that lived, cousin or aunt and uncle or sibling or something in the family. And that's just the way it was back then. There wasn't any non-relatives living out there. It was a very small place. And my mother was born in 1938. Well, back then they used to have and you probably heard of this, back then they used to have what they call quilting bees.
Yeah.
And a quilting bee, for those that don't know what they are, was if you were expecting a child, friends and family would come out, and they'd just come in the morning and spend the whole day making quilts and blankets for the baby when they were born.
Hey, Brian or Earl, if you give me just 1 second, my internet said it was unstable. Let me go turn off some stuff around the house real quick.
Okay,
I'm sorry about that.
that's all right.
I just don't want it to be lagging or anything. So hold on just 1 second. Okay, hopefully that fixed something. I don't know. It just showed up that it was unstable for me, so I turned off my phone. I turned off the TV in there. It's, this is the bad part of living in West Virginia, and I still have Frontier. So
Okay. Yeah, Brian mentioned that when you left, he just said Frontier Communications, which we have that all over here. So
That's
we
right.
know.
We communicate like we're on the frontier.
Yes. Yeah. Give them a few $1 million and they don't do what they promised to do. But
Amen.
Anyway, at this time, again, we're in 1938 out at Glenwood Park, and my grandparents lived in a nice little Appalachian Power Company. Well, back then there was a lot of people in the area, and by area I mean throughout eastern Kentucky, southern West Virginia, southwest Virginia, didn't have electric power yet. So he spent a lot of his time out working on putting up new power lines. And at this time he was out in eastern Kentucky putting up a new power line through the mountains there. My grandmother was back home, and she had a quilting bee, and that morning, about 6 of her friends came over, and they were sitting around, they were gossiping, telling the news stories of the community and everything while they were working. And while they were making the quilts and doing their gossip and news spreading, they kind of let time get away from them, and the whole day went by, and it started to get dark. Well, one of the ladies got up. They were in the dining room and where they were working, and one of the ladies got up and walked out of the dining room into the living area. And as soon as she did, the other ladies that were still sitting around the table, they heard this blood-curdling scream. So they all got up and they ran in the living area, and this lady had passed out as soon as she got in the living area. And so they got her up and they put her on the couch, and they brought her some salts and I think a little bit of alcohol, tried to get her revived, After she woke up, she was still shaking, and they couldn't get her to talk for about 10 minutes. Meanwhile, they all went around the house. Of course, back then, nobody locked their doors, but they looked outside to see if there was anybody outside that could have scared her. Didn't see anybody. Looked around the house to see if anybody had come in, went upstairs. Nobody seemed to be in the house. And they finally got this lady calmed down enough to where she could tell what had happened. And as soon as she walked in, and there was a stairway going up to the second floor, and she said that as soon as she looked over there, there was a figure. I guess he looked a lot like a monk. He had the brown cowl over him, and he had the hoodie over his head and everything. And he had his right arm was on the banister coming down the stairs, and she said the right arm was burned, and she could see the blood and the bone. And it was just walking down the stairs. So that's when she screamed and passed out.
Yeah.
And, yeah. And so they told her, they all tried to tell her it was just her imagination and she was seeing things and stuff like that. But she was noted in the community for being a little bit of a sensitive herself. So I don't know if they actually believed that she was imagining it or not. I don't think they did. but anyway, they got her calmed down. It was getting late in the day. It was already dark. So they walked her home, and most of the ladies except my great grandmother went on home for the evening. My great grandmother stayed with my grandmother, and of course my mother was there, but she wasn't born yet, and she was due in a couple of months. And the next morning, my grandmother got a call from Kentucky, and she was told that my grandfather had had a work-related accident and he was expected to die, and she better come see him. Well, being the kind of community that it was, she had loaned the car to her sister-in-law, so they had to walk up the road and get that back. And then her and her sister drove to Kentucky, and if I remember correctly, I believe it was near Hazard, Kentucky, but it wasn't in Hazard. It was a small village near there.
Right.
And my grandmother's sister was a nurse. Now, this was back in the day when everybody said that my great aunt should have been a doctor herself, but she was a woman, and back then that was pretty rare. So she was a nurse, but she went with them, and they drove to Kentucky. And when they got there, they found a hospital that was basically an old house in the small town, and they had converted it into a hospital. I remember they said there were 3 rooms for patients. There was an operating room and an office, and that was basically the whole hospital. And they went in there and they found my grandfather, and he had jet black hair. It had turned completely white. And what had happened to him was he was working on a closed circuit power line. And he told them he was actually demonstrating, because he was the foreman of the crew. He was demonstrating for one of the new guys what he needed to do. And he said, "You do not open this line up until you see my feet on the ground." Well, the guy later on claimed that he had heard a voice, grandfather. And my grandfather said, "No, I did not. I was working on the line when you opened it." But this was much later. What he did was he opened the line up while Grandpa was working on it, and 38,000 volts of electricity went through his arm, down through his side, and melted a crescent wrench into his hip, which they had to surgically remove. And they told him, and when my grandmother looked at that arm, it was exactly the way that lady was on that monk or whatever it was coming down the stairs. It was burned to the bone, and they couldn't stop the bleeding.
Wow.
And they said they were going to have to cut the arm off, but my great aunt wouldn't let him do it. She said he can be nursed back to health, and they did. And but he had jet black hair. It had turned completely white, and his arm was just a mess. Looked exactly like that monk or whatever it was that seen the night before. Well, he was in the hospital for 9 months and 20 days. And, nobody does this anymore, but him being who he was, he, 20 days, he went back to work for the power company and worked for him for about 32 years in the field after that. But, I don't know anybody that would do that after what he went through. I mean, that was 38,000 volts at the time that he got that 38,000 volts. Now it's been superseded since then many times, but at the time he had the most electricity to shoot through a human body and live. And he actually made it into the back then that Ripley's. He actually made it into one of the Ripley's books because of that. But that was the story that my grandmother told me. And that's the one that first got me interested in the paranormal, because I knew my grandmother wasn't going to lie about anything. And when she told me that story, I knew it was true. Plus, my great-grandmother confirmed it later.
Wow. That's a wild story, ain't it?
Yeah. She never did know what it was. A guardian angel. And she said, now she would see things like that from time to time herself. But she said the reason she thinks that it showed itself to this other lady was because my mother was pregnant at the time, and she saw it as benevolent, even though it wasn't a pretty sight. and she didn't want, or it didn't want her to see him and then collapse on the floor with my mother in her and everything.
Yeah, or mark the baby in some way. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. Man, well, I'm glad you shared that with me.
That's how I got interested in me and Brian.
Hold on, just want to say this internet is messing me up again. You keep pausing, like it's freezing on you. I'm just going to try to switch over real quick because it's supposedly it'll run 2G or 5G. So I'm going to see if that helps it at all. Okay, it's showing full internet. We're still good to go. Let's keep rolling, man. I'll holler at y'all if it freezes up on us again.
Okay, so that's how me and Brian, got together, because one of the reasons, well, we had political interests too that we talked about a lot, but then the paranormal, that's kind of what got me interested in when we started a paranormal research group, which was more just for fun. We didn't pretend like we knew what we were doing, but we would go out and do investigations and stuff. And Brian would go with us too. He joined in with us. Got one more story I'll tell you.
Yeah.
That got me interested too. This was a little bit later, but this is another old one. There's a mountain near here called Stovall Ridge, and my great grandmother was a Stovall, and I've always considered myself lucky because not a whole lot of people get to live at a time when they know their great grandparents well.
Yeah.
But my great grandmother, I was 15 years old when she died, so I knew her well. And I've got several stories I can tell you about her. This one isn't paranormal, but it's really short and it's funny. I think she had a 4-story house. And I was walking up by her house one day, and she was up there cleaning the outside windows to her attic. It was 4 stories if you counted the basement and the attic. And she was up on an extension ladder. She was 91 years old at the time. And she's up on this ladder way up there cleaning the outside of the windows. And I looked up at her, and she looked down at me and she said, "You don't think I ought to be doing this, do you?" I said, "Well, I don't think you ought to be doing it in a dress." And she looked down and she said, "Well, I guess you're right." And she climbed down off the ladder, went in the house, and she came out in overalls and went right back at it. But my great grandmother, now she was something else. She was a wildcat, and all her life, even when I knew her when she was older. Well, when she was young and she lived up on Stovall Ridge, you come down Stovall Ridge, you go through a little place called Spanishburg, and then which is not really a town, it's more a farming community. And you go on past that and you come into Princeton, which is the metropolitan area around here, almost 8,000 people. And so she had got, or her family had gotten a car. Now, this was about 1916 or something like that. So there was no driver's license.
Right.
You didn't have any regulation or anything other than your dad said you're okay to be on the road. He was wrong, but he made that proclamation, and she decided she wanted to drive down off the ridge into Princeton. It's about 8 miles into Princeton. And she had a big family. She had 11 siblings, and one of her sisters wanted to go with her. So and I only heard this story one time. They didn't talk about it a lot because it wasn't something my great grandmother wanted to remember. But anyway, one of her younger sisters, she was about 16. The younger sister was about 14. She wanted to go with her. So they loaded up in the car and they started into Princeton. My great grandmother was driving. Well, it's a twisting, winding road into Princeton, and there's a bridge over the Bluestone River. There's several, but the first one you come to, the bridge goes right into the turn. And my great grandmother was flying like she always was, and she hit the bridge and the side of it. And when she did, I guess maybe my great grandmother was buckled in because she didn't leave the vehicle, but her sister wasn't, and she went flying through the windshield and landed on the bridge. And she landed on her head and then kind of flipped over, and she was dead almost instantly. Well, years later, I'm a lawyer here in town, and one of the lawyers that I used to work with, she was telling about how she was driving down near Spanishburg, and they had seen this girl standing on the bridge that looked like she was dressed in 19th, early 20th century attire. And as they went past her, they thought, she's too young to be out here. This was like 2 o'clock in the morning. And they thought, she's too young to be out here by herself, standing on this bridge in basically the middle of nowhere. So they pulled over right when they got past the bridge. They turned around to ask her if she needed a ride. And she was a full-bodied, turned out she was a full-bodied apparition, because while they were looking at her, she just disappeared right in front of their eyes. It wasn't they turned around and she wasn't there. They turned around and she was still there, but she disappeared right in front of her and her daughter's eyes.
Wow.
And when she told me that story, I said, I bet I know who that is. And I said, why don't you take me out there sometime, and I'll tell you the story. And she said, well, I'll tell you where it is. I said, oh, I know where it is. She said, well, then you go out there. I will not go out there after sundown again, ever. And she meant it. Well, come a few years later, a couple years later, this lady was still working in our office. And my grandmother died. So I was going through some of the family heirlooms and everything, and pictures and everything. And oh my gosh, it was a chore, because they took pictures of pretty much everything. I mean, there was boxes and boxes and boxes of pictures that they had just stored away. They couldn't put them in albums, because I don't think they had that many albums, but the boxes of pictures were just something. And I came on this one box of this, it looked like a wreck, and there were police standing around. You can tell the pictures had been taken at night, and they were extremely old. And then I saw this girl. They had taken some close-ups of this girl that was laying there, obviously dead, in the middle of the road. And I got to thinking, and I thought, you know, that's probably the wreck that I was told about earlier. And so I didn't have time to go through all the pictures, and I took that box to the office with me. And when I had some downtime, I started going through the pictures, looking at them, and I'd laid a few out. Well, I got up out of my office to go talk to somebody there, and while I was talking to one of the secretaries, I hear her scream, and I come back in there, and I said, what's wrong? Well, she's standing there over the pictures, and she's just shaking. And she's got one of the pictures of my great aunt laying there dead in the road. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, this is a picture of that girl that we saw standing on the bridge when we drove through at 2 o'clock in the morning. And this is the reason I will not go back there after dark. I said, well, that's my great aunt. And then I went ahead and told her the story, and she didn't say anything. She just shook her head and walked away.
Wow. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, those are the kind of things that really got me interested in it. And you know, then we went and did we've gone to the old West Virginia State Lunatic Asylum in Weston.
Yeah.
One of my favorites ghost hunts that we've been there several times is Pocahontas. Pocahontas used to be a big coal mining town here, and it's in Virginia, but we're on the county, the county borders Virginia, so it's not very far away.
Yeah.
And it's just across state line. There's a lot of people, well, I was going to say a lot of people live in Pocahontas and work here, but okay, of the people who are still there, a lot of them work in West Virginia, because Pocahontas used to be about 10,000 people back when the coal was booming.
And now it's about 10.
Well, I think their population now is around 300.
Wow.
And but one of the things we did when we were at Pocahontas, there's the old coal mine that they used to work. There was an explosion there, and I don't know how many people were killed in that.
125, I think.
Yeah, and they just I mean, a lot of the bodies were unidentifiable and everything, so they buried them in a mass grave in the Pocahontas Cemetery. Well, one of the town council ladies, yes, they still have a town council, she had told us that she had gotten permission from the mayor for us to come one night and go down and explore in the old mine. Now, what she didn't know at the time was that the mayor and her were political enemies. She found this out that night because the mayor had given her written permission to take a group down in there and explore the mine. Well, one of the things we did was we took some Maglite flashlights down there, and we had 3 of them, and we set them up on one side of the mine and walked across and just sat there and started asking questions and everything. And as I remember at the time, nothing was really happening. The lights didn't come on, they didn't go off, nothing was going on. So we just kind of sat there and got to talking. There was me and Brian, the council lady, my ex-wife, Natalie, and another attorney here in town, David Smith, who was also interested in the paranormal. And we were all sitting there just talking and everything. And all of a sudden I look up and there's like a shadow there. Now, where we were sitting, there's a turn in the mine. You know, you go around a curve and then you go straight down for a long time. And we were sitting right at the edge of that curve. And I looked up, I was sitting next to my wife at the time, and I said, there's a shadow figure coming down the cave or down the mine. And you could see it was clearly coming down. Well, my wife looked over and she kind of froze up. She, because here it came, there was no denying it. We were all looking at it. But as the shadow figure got closer and closer, we could hear heavy boot thuds. And as the shadow figure came around the corner, the shadow figure was wearing a Virginia State Troopers uniform, complete with badge. And he said, he started into us right away. He said, y'all are trespassing. If you don't leave now, we're going to arrest you. And, you know, on and on. He just lit into us. Well, the council lady, she had a temper and she was furious. And she got up and she said, I've got written permission from the mayor right here. And she started to take the letter out of her back pocket. And he said, lady, I don't care what you've got. I was called by the mayor to come down here and find out what was going on at the mine. And y'all are trespassing. Well, the funny thing was, I looked over and he saw it, the trooper saw it too out of the corner of his eye, I could tell, because his conversation with us completely changed. And I'll give you an example here in a second, but we looked over and the middle, we had 3 lights over there, and all of a sudden the middle light goes on. Now, keep in mind, we're sitting probably 25 feet from it. Nobody is anywhere near the flashlights, but the middle light goes on. And then the one on the left goes on. And then the one in the center turns off, and the one on the right goes on. And then they both turn off, and the middle one comes on, and then they all 3 came on. And they're just putting on a light show. And we're sitting there looking, and the trooper is sitting there. He's not looking directly at it, but you can tell the way he kind of slanted his head. He's seeing this out of the corner of his eye. And his conversation with us went something like this. He said, if you don't leave now, you're all under arrest, and I can see that y'all aren't bothering anything. And clearly you've got permission from the mayor. And about this time, he starts backing up. And he's telling us this. And he says, and y'all aren't hurting anything. Be sure and lock the gate when you get out. Y'all have a good time. About that time, he makes it around the corner. And as soon as he got around that corner, he turned around, and you could tell from his boot thuds that he was running out of the mine as fast as he could get out. And that was the last we saw him.
Oh, man. You got saved by a ghost.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's a good.
We went to we went in the Pocahontas Cemetery quite a bit too. You could, in Virginia, if you have family buried in the cemetery, you can go in there at any time. Well, the council lady had some relatives that were buried there, so they were distant, but we kind of used that as a pass to go in there. Now, eventually we did get banned from going in the cemetery, because the other attorney that I was telling you about, David, he was on the Historic Pocahontas Preservation Committee, and there was this war going on between them and the town council, minus our ally that was on it. Right. And they had some devil worshippers go in the cemetery a little while before, and they had gone through and they had sprayed up some monuments and different things like that. And so I remember when David told us they had banned us from the cemetery, I said, how did you manage to convince them that we were devil worshippers? Me and Brian are Baptist and you're Methodist. How did you manage this? But anyway, before that happened, we went in the cemetery, and we were there. The cemetery is divided into, because this is how they brought in coal miners, and there was different sections of the cemetery. There was a Hungarian section, there was a Czech section, a Chinese section, a Russian section. Well, just so happens my ex-wife is Russian. She's actually Ukrainian, and she would probably shoot me for calling her a Russian, but they're like Canadians and Americans, they got about 50 words different in their language, and so they're trying to fight each other to extinction. But she speaks fluent Russian, because in the Ukraine it was part of the Soviet Union for so long that all the countries speak fluent Russian plus whatever their native language is. And Ukrainians, like I said, there's about 50 words that are different anyway. Right. So we were over in the Russian section, and I turned, and everybody else had their back to it. But I'm staring right over the graves, and I see this lady come across the cemetery, and she's in a black hat, and she's wearing like a black dress, and then she just disappeared. And she disappeared right when she came over one of the Russian graves, and I went over and looked, and it was a Russian name and everything. So we all went over and we checked out several of the Russian graves in that section, and my wife had this idea to start singing in Russian because she thought they might enjoy it. And she did. She started singing. She had a pretty voice, has a pretty voice. And she started singing this Russian folk song. And we were playing EVPs later on, and you can hear an EVP it was in English, but it was in very, very thick Russian accent, and something said, "She's Russian." Wow. And awesome. Before we were done with the EVP, they joined. You could tell there were different voices. You clearly could tell my wife's voice was different from these other voices that joined in with her. But there were other Russian voices that were singing along with her on the EVP. And you could tell, I think there were like 3 or 4 of them, and they were all singing along with her. And I said, "What was that song?" And she said, "It was just an old Russian folk song." She said, "I sang it because if they were, alive in like the 1920s or something, they would have known this song." Right. And they did. They sang it right along with her, and it was clear all the way through the songs. They didn't stop till she did. And there was kind of a little bit of a giggle or laugh at the end of the song when she quit singing.
That gave me chills. That's an experience,
Yeah, that was we had some fun in that cemetery. Of course, we were always, despite what the majority of town council thought, we were always very respectful. We tried not to step on graves and things like that. Yeah. But we had some fun in there. We were in the Hungarian section one time, and I set my EVP recorder right next to one of the gravestones from one of the Hungarians, and I was trying to do an EVP, on it, but I couldn't because it kept moving. Every time I reached down to get it, it would slide. Now, we never did get an EVP out of that, but there was no excuse for that to slide unless somebody was moving it, you know.
Yeah.
Definitely. And if you get tired, don't ever sit on a gravestone. It's bad manners.
Yeah.
And you might get your butt pinched.
Well, that was the one time what Brian is describing. We were still, I don't remember if we were in or near the Russian section at the time, but Brian was getting exhausted. I mean, we got there about 11 o'clock. It's now like 3:30 in the morning. So Brian decides he's going to sit down on one of the gravestone, monuments. And I said, Brian, don't do that. That's not really what we want to do.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, it'll be all right. I'm not sitting on the grave or anything, just the headstone. Well, we got ready to go to another section. And Brian said, wait a minute. I said, what's wrong? He said, I can't move. I said, what do you mean you can't move? You're perfectly healthy guy, you know, at that time anyway. And I said, just get up and let's go. And he said, no, you don't understand. I can't move. And for about 5 minutes, something had a hold of him and he could not move.
Oh my gosh. The Russian got a hold of you.
So be respectful. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man.
That my favorite incident though in that one, and I think I shared this with you, was when Dave lost his laser grid pen in amongst the stones, and he couldn't find it. And he looked. And none of us had a clue where he might have dropped it. And in the EVP later, you hear this really deep voice say, "Well, shit, he'll never find it."
Now he had. I think when you say the laser grid, are you talking about the one that had the multiple lights? And, okay, I got a quick one about that too.
Yeah.
We were Dave had pointed his laser grid toward one of the mausoleums, and you know the way those things work. You know, if anything goes by it, you'll be able to see the disruption in the different points of light. Well, he had it set up against that monument or against that mausoleum because it was the biggest thing in the area and more light pebbles could be around it. And Dave kept saying, do you want to go through the light? Do you want to go through the light? I've got the light set up right on the mausoleum. Just walk through the light. We'll be able to see you. Well, we didn't see anything, but about that time, my wife grabs her ear and she goes, who screamed? Well, none of the rest of us could hear anything. But she said, well, while Dave was back there saying, do you want to go through the light? Do you want to go through the light? All of a sudden, something screamed, already been. And I said, we didn't hear anything. Well, we replayed the EVP recorder. And sure enough, now it wasn't a scream the way she heard it. I mean, she grabbed her ear and put her head down. She said it was so loud. But you could clearly hear, and I know a lot of people, you know, they play EVPs and they're like, listen to this, and you can't really tell what it is until they say, you know, this is what you're supposed to hear. Well, that wasn't the case on this one. Dave is sitting back there pointing the light, and he says, walk through the light. Do you want to go through the light? And he said it 4 or 5 times, and all of a sudden we hear something clearly says, I've already been.
Wow.
And that was what she heard screaming in her ear. Now, it didn't, when we heard it on the EVP recorder, it did not sound like a scream, but it was very clear. But it was at the same time on the EVP recorder, at that same time, you could hear my wife yell, who screamed that? And that was what it was.
That's fantastic. Now, did she have a lot of activity around her? Because it seems like maybe she was a little bit sensitive.
Well, I think she is. Now, she is, and this is since we got divorced, she's gotten extremely religious, which, like I said, we're Baptist. I don't mind that. But I mean, you know, you can take anything too far.
Yeah.
And she's gotten extremely religious. She will not go on ghost hunts. She won't do any of that now.
Yeah.
But I do think she is a little bit sensitive because when we used to, especially when we used to go up to the mental asylum at Weston, Dave used to call her Ghost Mate. And one time we were walking down through a section of the hospital, and all of a sudden she yelled and she was like, "Ow!" What? And I was like, "What's wrong?" Because I couldn't see anything, that had happened to her. And she kind of bent on one leg, and she said, "Something just scratched my hip." And I said, "Well, it's probably the way you got your clothes or something. You probably just scratched against your hip from your shirt or something." I didn't think it was any big deal, but she kept complaining about it. So we got off to one of the rooms, and I said, "Well, come in here and let me see what it is." And she pulls her pants down a little bit on the hip, and she had 3 scratch marks right down her hip. And I said, "Well, it's there. I mean, I don't know what to do about it. I mean, it doesn't look bad enough that you need like immediate medical attention, but there's clearly 3 marks down your hip." Well, while we were checking it, Dave, he sticks his head in there and he says, "Everything okay?" Well, my wife had her pants half down, and I said, "Dave, just go outside. We'll be all right in a minute." About 2 minutes later, Dave sticks his head back in. "Y'all need some help?" I said, "No, Dave, we don't need any help. Get out." And this happens like 4 or 5 times. And finally I yelled at him. I'm like, "Dave, get out. We'll be out in a few minutes." So anyway, those marks, I mean, like I said, they weren't bad enough that she needed medical attention, but they were bad enough that they were still there the next day.
Wow.
And I asked our guide, because what they do, I don't know if you've ever been to Weston or not, but
I haven't. No.
okay, you should go.
Oh,
It
yeah.
is a fun trip. And what they do is they will take you on each floor. There's 4 floors, and they'll give you a quick guided tour that lasts about maybe 10 minutes. Then they turn you loose for about an hour and a half to that floor. And there's only 10 of you on the floor, and it's a big building. So it's real easy to feel like you're completely alone, because if you're like, there were at the time, I think there were 4 of us in our group. It was just me. Well, it was me, Brian, Dave, and Natasha. So yeah, that was 4. And when there's just 4 of you and there's 6 other people on the other end of the hall, these halls are long.
Yeah.
And they go through curves, and you go in, technically you're in a different hall. So you really do start to feel like you're alone. Well,
You're not alone for long.
yeah, you're not alone. And so I asked our guide, because you go through 4 floors, and you have trouble remembering which section is which and all of that. You just try to remember the hot spots that they point out so you can go investigate those.
Right.
But I asked our guide, I said, what wing were we in when I told him what had happened? And I said, "What wing were we in when that happened?" And he looked at us and grinned, and he said, "Well, you were in the section for juvenile sex offenders."
Oh, my God.
And I said, so I looked at Natasha and I said, "Well, now you know what happened."
Yeah.
Yep.
And but yeah, I remember one time me and Brian, this was on a different trip, and there was just the 3 of us at that time, me, Brian, and my ex-wife, and we were coming down. We were on the first floor, and the tour basically ends around 5 a.m. Well, it was around 4:45. We were just going to go back to the break room. We were exhausted, and just sit there and have some coffee or something. And I didn't know where Natasha was. She was off way behind us for some reason. Natalie. Natasha's kind of a Russian pet name for Natalie. And so we're coming down there, and we're about to go through the doors into the main entrance there, which is the only section that they have completely fixed up to look not modern, but the way it did back then.
Yeah. And
we're about to go in that section, and I'm looking around for Natasha, and I don't see where she's at. And it turns out she's way back there, because the reason we found out where she was, as often happens in these things, we heard a scream. Well, here she comes running down the hallway. And when I turned and looked at her, what she was doing didn't make any sense, because she would start running and then she'd back up and she'd yell, ah, and then she'd try to go to her right, she'd run and she'd back up, she'd try to go to her left and run and back up. And finally she just shoots completely down the middle, going past us. And Brian and I, being tired, I remember Brian looked at me and he goes, that. And so we get out there and she's already sitting in the break room, and she said, didn't you see that? And I said, see what? She said, there was some woman right in front of me. And she said, I said, well, I thought you'd lost your mind because you just kept running forward and backing up, going to your right, backing up.
Yeah.
She said, that's because this woman kept blocking me every time I tried to run. And she said, finally, I decided I got to get out of here. I'm just going to run right through it. And she did. She ran right through whatever it was that was blocking her, and ran out into the break room and waited for us. And she said, I'm not going back in there. And I think that was the last trip that she took with us.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would love. Let's tell about the green light, and let me introduce it, and then you take the half that.
Oh, okay. The one in my old house. Yeah.
Oh, no, up at Talent. Remember something down the hall?
Oh, see, you're going to have to tell that, because see, most of this was going on and I didn't even know it. So you'll have to tell that.
Well, no, you're going to remember. You're going to remember here in a minute. We had gone. I think we were on the 4th floor. It was late in the evening. There were these. It was just 3 of us. I think Earl and Dave and myself. The 4th floor at one time was living quarters for staff.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different part of that building. The floors are different. They're wooden instead of the tile and things. There are little windows and cubbies and skylights. But when you're in this place investigating, there's one bare bulb where the guy drops you, and everything else is just pitch dark. It's just black. So you've got your flashlights, whatever you got with you when you go investigating. There were these 2 young ladies that were there by themselves. There was nobody else in their group, and one of them had gotten scratched all the way down her back and the floor just before that, and she was really disturbed. So we sat down, we were having a rest, talking to these young ladies, trying to calm her down, make her feel more comfortable. Well, in the dark, we're sitting in the pitch black. Earl slips down the hall by himself, quietly, moves into the next wing. I heard the door. And about that time, a disembodied voice of a woman starts to sing a lullaby, like she was singing to a little child. It was down the hall a ways.
Mm-mm.
And we're just listening to this. We'd been talking to those girls and comforting those girls, and we didn't have a bit of recording equipment going. We're just experiencing this, real excited about it. Right after it was over, I was like, well, I got to go tell Earl. He bursts through the door. You guys got to come up here. You got to hurry up. You got to come up here. And he doesn't do that, right?
Right.
Cool as a cucumber. I mean, he's lived through experiences you've not heard about that would cause most people to lose it. But he comes out there really excited. We go up the hall, there's nothing there, and then he tells the story, which he's going to remember when I tell it. He says, I walked through the doors, and there was a green light at the other end of the hall. Well, I heard voices, so I was really quiet. I didn't want to interfere with anybody's investigation. And then very clearly, I heard one of them say, there's something at the other end of the hall watching us. And the light went out. So he goes to turn his light on, and there isn't anything there.
Wow.
There was nobody else in that wing. So it was literally spirits, the green light talking. They realized somebody was watching
them.
Yeah, I thought, I remember that now that Brian mentioned it. I thought that was another investigating group until there was nobody there.
Right, until it wasn't.
Right. Right.
We in that place, we've had black figures run around our legs. We've been hit and scratched and you name it, choked. It's not a place for the faint of heart.
You're not exactly making me want to go.
Well, but as far as I know, nobody's ever really been hurt there.
Yeah.
Now there was one guy. This isn't really our story, but it's one of the ones that the guide was telling us about. There was a guy that was back from Afghanistan or Iraq. I can't remember which it was, and he was going to re-up, but he had a little bit of time off, and he wanted to do a guide tour. And normally you got to have 40 people because you have 10 people on each floor. That's never a problem because there's always people signing up.
Right.
But this was kind of the off season, but they figured, he's back from serving his country. We want to give him the tour, so they did. And he said something started, he was sitting in the hallway and something started crawling toward him.
Right.
And he said it was like furry and way too big to be any known animal. It looked like a human that was, sort of like a human, but it was crawling on all fours. And he got up and ran out of there and he said, "Thanks for the tour, guys, but I'm done." And, he did not want to go back. He said, "I've seen stuff in Afghanistan, but this I don't want to see."
Oh my gosh.
And but like I said, nobody's ever been hurt there, as far as I know.
Yeah. Well, see,
You might get scratched, but that's as bad as it's going to be.
Yeah.
Don't antagonize. All I could say.
Now, when Brian was talking about the green light, I thought he was talking about the one in my old house where I partially grew up in. My great grandmother that I was telling you about, she in her second marriage, she moved to Roanoke because her husband, who I always just thought of as my great grandfather, I never did know her first husband. Right. He worked for the railroad, so she moved to Roanoke. Well, when she got up in her years, my grandparents, and they raised me, my grandparents did, because my mother died young. I was about 14 months old. And my grandparents moved down to Roanoke, a couple of houses over from her. They kept a house here in Mercer County, but they were always going back and forth because they wanted to keep an eye on her. She was getting in her late 80s, early 90s, and somebody needed to keep an eye on her. And she would not move out of her house. One time, part of her ceiling caved in because she had a leakage, and she kept my grandparents out of the house as long as she could because she was afraid they'd make her move. But what she didn't even understand about herself was you couldn't make her move. She wasn't the type that was going anywhere.
Yeah.
So anyway, that house that they bought was built about 1906, and it was a big, kind of a sprawling house. It had the full basement, walk-in attic, where you could put bedrooms up there if you wanted to. And it originally on the second floor had been 6 bedrooms, but they knocked out a couple of walls and made it kind of a living TV area out of 2 of the rooms. And then it was still a 4-bedroom house. Downstairs, you had the fireplace. You had the dining room with the sliding doors where you could close off the dining room from the rest of the house. There was a parlor next to that, and then a big kitchen and pantry and all that. It was just that one of those old-fashioned houses, and it had a porch, a wraparound porch that went 3/4 of the way around the house, and we loved to sit out there in the evenings and just enjoy the sun going down and the neighbors coming by and talking to them and everything. But anyway, there was a legend, I guess you'd call it a legend now because it had been so long ago. Supposedly the house had been built by a guy who worked for the railroad for his bride. And according to the legend, the bride ran off with somebody else just before they were supposed to get married. Well, the guy, and again, the reason I keep saying the legend is because we actually found out the true story of what happened later on one of our ghost hunts. But according to the legend, the guy rented out the rest of the house, and he just kept one room, and it had a bathtub in it at the time. And you could still, and that turned out, of course, to be my bedroom. You could still see the pipe came out of the wall just a few inches, where the bathtub used to be and everything. Right. And I just put my bed over next to that section. Well, one day I was in school and I had been working on some school project for, it was like 3 days. I hadn't slept all day and all night. And I'd finally finished it. I get home from school and it's about 3 o'clock. And I told my grandmother, I said, I'm going to bed. I'm exhausted. I've been up for 72 hours. I can hardly walk. So I went upstairs, went to bed, but it was hot. And my grandparents, because they didn't have air conditioning when they were growing up, of course, they didn't believe anybody else needed air conditioning either.
Right.
So it's burning up. I opened up my window and I put a fan in there, and I had the fan going on high. And I know I was not asleep because I could not sleep. You know, the harder you try to go to sleep, the more likely you're not going to go to sleep.
Yep.
So I turned and tossed and everything. And I kept hearing, my grandmother had a little office that was right off next to my bedroom. And and she had this old chair in there. And I kept hearing it shift, like somebody was shifting their weight. And I finally got up in there and I went in there and I was going to tell my grandmother, would you please stop moving around in the chair? It's creaking and I can't sleep. Well, when I went in there, there was no one in that office.
Of course.
So I thought, well, okay. By this time, I'll never have time to tell you as many stories as what went on in that house. So I knew what was going on, but it had never bothered us. You know, I mean, stuff happened, nothing demonic or anything like that.
Right.
So I just thought, well, okay, maybe they'll stop. I'm going back to bed. Well, I laid there and I was closing my eyes as hard as I could, knowing I'm not going to be able to sleep because this thing's still rattling around. It's still keeping me awake. And all of a sudden, this hand comes down over my head. I can feel it. And I opened my eyes up. And when I opened my eyes, whatever it was took its hand off my head. And I flipped over in the bed because my bed was set up so that one side of it was against the wall. The other side was to the entrance of the bedroom. And I rolled over and there was this dark shadow figure standing over me. I'll call it a shadow figure. It was like a spirit, I guess.
Yeah.
But anyway, me being me and me that kind of being used to weird stuff going on in the house, I backed up against the wall and I said, what do you want? And it said, nothing, I'm just watching you.
Oh my.
And then it disappeared. So I got up and I went downstairs and I asked my grandmother, have you been upstairs? Now, this is when you try to rationalize something like that. It doesn't make a bit of sense. That thing didn't look anything like my grandmother. Right. But I asked her, I said, have you been upstairs? She said, no, I've been down here cooking. And she was standing over next to the sink. I said, where's Grandpa? She said, he went to the hardware store. I said, okay. And I didn't say anything to my grandmother about what had happened. And I turned around, I started to walk out of the kitchen. And my grandmother said, why did you push me? I turned around and I was 25 feet from her. And I said, what do you mean? She said, you just came up here and pushed me just a little bit. I said, no, I didn't. You can see where I'm standing. Oh. She said, oh, well, something did. And she just went back to washing. So I went upstairs and eventually I did get to sleep. But years later, I was grown. We had sold the house to, my grandparents had died by this time. And I sold the house to some friends of ours and they weren't using it at the time. And I said, would you mind if we came down there and we did a ghost hunt?
Yeah.
And they said, no, we don't care. Go ahead. So we came down there and it was me and Dave, and there was another guy with us that joined in. I can't remember his name now, but anyway, we went up there and we were trying to get EVPs and everything. And we set up a spirit box and we started having this conversation with this entity. And I said, were you the spirit that said it was watching me when I was young? And it said yes on the spirit box. And I said, why were you watching me? Were you spying on me or were you trying to protect me? And it said, protect you. And I started asking it questions because I knew some of the history of the house. You know, when was the house built? It told us when it was built. I knew that was accurate and everything.
Wow.
And so I said, were you the person that built the house? That said, yes. Well, without getting into too much detail about the conversation, because the conversation went on for about an hour and a half, it told us that what had actually happened was, it wasn't that his bride left him and he committed suicide. Oh, I left that part out. Supposedly, according to the legend, he had one day had just gotten in his bathtub, slit his wrists, and bled out.
Right.
That was the legend. What, according to this entity, had actually happened was that he came home one day. It was a big enough house that I guess she had already moved into it, even though they weren't cohabitating yet. But he came to visit her, and he found out that she was carrying on an affair with somebody, and he caught her. And the guy jumped out of bed and started beating him, and his bride jumped in on it, and they murdered him. And and after that, of course, with forensics, you couldn't do this now because, you know, they know better than that. You stop bleeding when you die and all of this. But back then, they wouldn't have known any better. They didn't have the forensics to really tell it. But they had slit his wrist and put him in the bathtub to make it look like a suicide. But they caught him, and they caught her. And according to him, the guy died in prison in Virginia. But the wife, he said, she beat the charge and she lived out her days. And I said, why are you here? And it said, to guard them. And I said, you mean you're guarding their spirits? And he said, yes. And I said, who told you to guard them? And he said, God.
What?
Yeah, he said, God told him to guard these people. And so he's been spending this nearly over 100 years now guarding these two spirits who murdered him. And apparently he has some sort of authority over them. They can't leave the house, but he said he was there to protect me. And he must have done a good job, because like I said, we had weird stuff happen in that house forever, but we never felt threatened or anything like that.
Man, wow. That's wild.
Yeah.
Okay, I got questions now, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And it's not real specific questions, you know, about any particular story. But one, with all these places you guys go and places that you've lived throughout the years, have you all ever had something attach itself to you or try to follow you back home?
Brian did.
Yep, I'm going to be in trouble now.
Let's hear it.
I'm going to be in trouble now because my wife's going to get mad when she listens to this. Yeah, it did happen. As far as I know, she's gone now. She claimed to be a former slave. In fact, here's the story I got.
Okay.
The story I got was that she was purchased in Kentucky by a doctor who moved to the asylum to work. And she died there and stayed there. Why this thing followed me home, I can't say. I encouraged her to go to the light.
Mm-hmm.
She seemed to get frustrated and angry about that, and that worried me a little bit.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be the first time I told something to leave. This happened to me over the years many times, and periodically, you know, it seems like things just pass through, and I will pray and read scripture and command them in Jesus' name, you know, to leave, that they are no longer welcome. They're not welcome in this place. As far as I know, she left, but yeah, it freaked me out a little bit. In fact, I got real mad at it one day before I had told her to leave. And I was kind of fussing, and she knocked a globe off of one of my oil lamps. I love my oil lamp, so then I was really upset, but it didn't break. As far as I know, no harm done.
Yeah.
But, occasionally, over the years, I've heard footsteps in the house, and again, did the same thing, just told them to leave.
Yeah.
I'll welcome anything that's good and not anything that has bad intentions. But
Right.
with the spirit, you never know.
That's it. Yeah, you never know. It could be telling you that it's
Right.
a former slave, and it be demonic, just trying to play on your sympathy.
Exactly. It'd be something nasty.
Yeah.
But now, when my girl was little, when we first moved into that place, she was just a toddler. She was seeing a man in there for a long time, and I didn't know it. I gotten out some tools one day, and I was doing something, and she says, "Oh, you have one just like the man." And I said, "What man?" She said, "The man who goes around the house with tools and fixes things like you do." And I was like, "What?" Yeah, but she'd been seeing this man going around the house with tools, doing things. She said he had a red and blue shirt, or a red, white, and blue shirt. I can't remember. Another weird thing that happened right after we moved in, and this is how long ago this was. We still had a film camera, 35 millimeter.
Oh yeah.
And Abby was painting. We'd been painting in the kitchen, and so she grabbed a brush and was painting. So my wife goes to take a picture, and she's standing next to a window. And when she snapped that picture, the flash was incredibly bright, and there was this loud cracking sound, and the glass in the window cracked. About 6-8 inch crack came in that window. We never knew what caused it or why it happened.
Wow.
But there's a reflection of a man that shows up in the picture in the window. Yeah.
I got to add something real quick to Brian telling about the former slave that followed him home.
Yeah.
Our favorite guide up at Weston is a guy named Copperhead. They call him Copperhead just because he's got copper blonde hair and everything, but he's really the best guide up there. And Brian was telling him the next time we went up there, because for a while we went there once a year. And the next time we went up there, he told Copperhead, Brian did, about that supposed slave or whatever she really was coming down there with him. And he said, "We'll bring her back. We can't have people carrying off our ghosts."
So yeah, I'll send her ass back. No problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got more questions, because this, I might have talked to you about this before, Brian. When I do shows about Bigfoot,
Yeah.
or just whatever, I have no problems with anything. My audio was just right, the internet works just fine. I don't see black things out of the corner of my eye in my house or get cold spots. But when I do paranormal shows, it's happened probably at least half a dozen times, to the point where I have to go through and, do my whatever version of casting things out I can think of. At the time, I'm not real well versed in that, but, I light the sage and I use Jesus's name, and booger, be gone. And it works so far. So, but with that kind of stuff, and with something attaching to you, what do you guys both, I want to hear from both of you too. What do you think this is? Like, what are these ghosts? What are these spirits? Are spirits and souls the same thing? I know I'm throwing like a big, like, vague kind of stuff at you, but what's your just general idea of what these spirits are, and how are we communicating with them and them with us?
Well, I've developed a theory about that, and I admit I don't know. It is just a theory, but it's based on what I've experienced and what I've read and everything. But I do think that when people refer to their higher selves, they're talking about their ultimate soul. And that ultimate soul, I believe, is in the celestial world. And I've come to believe, although I fought against this for the longest time, but I finally come to think that it probably is true. And you can even find examples of it in the Bible, which is why I resisted it for so long, because I had a very conservative religious upbringing, and then I found out this was in the Bible. But I do believe we reincarnate, and I
do too.
Yeah. I like I said, I resisted that for the longest time, but the more I read, and even in the Bible, I came to the conclusion that probably is true, because remember I think it's in Matthew, where after John the Baptist's disciples, after John the Baptist was killed, the disciples came to Jesus and they said, "Are you the Messiah?" And he basically said yes. And they said, "How can you be the Messiah? The scriptures clearly say that Elijah has to come first." And yeah, Elijah did come and you didn't recognize him, and he was talking about John the Baptist.
Yeah.
And I think that's a perfect example of reincarnation there. And I think what happens is, to God, or the ultimate entity, whatever I'm going to call him God because that's my upbringing. Right. But whatever you want to call him, the ultimate power in the universe, time is meaningless. So like that girl, my great aunt that I was telling you about that was down on that bridge, somebody said, "Well, wouldn't that be cruel to have her stuck there for over 100 years? And I said, "How do you know she was stuck there for 100 years? To her, her death might have happened a few minutes ago, and she might still be exploring, because time is meaningless, to God and to the celestial realm." And I think that our spirit is a portion of our soul. And it's the portion of our soul that comes down to earth. And I believe we're sent down here to learn, and to learn how to be kinder to each other, to learn basically how to behave. It's like being in school. And I think that's why reincarnation happens, because God gives us as many chances as we need to learn what we need to learn. And I think that sometimes when we encounter spirits, those are the spirits that have not yet reincarnated. And they might seem like they're hundreds of years old, but to them, it might be a few minutes, And when they reincarnate, we won't see them anymore, at least not in that form, I don't think, because that's when that portion of that spirit goes back, is reunited with the ultimate soul, the higher self, and then we can reincarnate. That's just my theory. I don't pretend to have answers to all this, but that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and it does make sense. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I do believe in reincarnation. Brian knows that. And I think for the same reason, I think that we get chance after chance until the day of judgment, to get Christ-like, that's the ultimate goal, right?
Right.
And I think it makes sense to me, because I don't want to get too deep into, religion, but it makes sense to me as why we come, we have to go somewhere after we die, and until judgment day, I don't think we're going to go to heaven or hell. I think we're going to have to come back and try again, take another swing until we can reach, that Christ-like state or enlightenment or whatever you want to call it. But
right.
Yeah, I appreciate you telling me that, Earl. Brian, are you on the same page with Earl, or
when it comes to these sorts of things, and people get mad, people get upset with thoughts and theories that contradict what they've always been taught. But I always say the plain things are the main things, and the main things are the plain things, and hold on to those. Yeah. But keep a little bit of an open mind. There is an unseen realm, as you well know.
Yeah.
And we don't understand it entirely, and we don't have an instruction book to it. We've got a lot of hints, a lot of clues, a lot of stories that are ancient, And it's really hard unless you're a scholar and you've read a lot of ancient material to understand sometimes the deeper meaning.
Yeah.
So I think, keep an open mind. Are you familiar with the story of Patience Worth?
I don't think so.
Well, Patience Worth was a woman, I want to say from St. Louis, 100 and some years ago. Very simple, not very intelligent, kind of a workaday person in that time. Couldn't read, couldn't write, no education to speak of. All of a sudden one day, not only is she reading and writing, but she's writing poetry and she's writing novels that are bestsellers in the time. People would interview her, and what they discovered was a spirit of a woman claimed to be inhabiting her. And the woman told her history. I don't remember exactly when she was from, but colonial America. She had always wanted to be a writer. In her time, she couldn't do it. She encounters Patience Worth, who is very simple and willing to let her work through her. People asked her a lot of questions. And one of those questions was, well, if you died all this time ago, shouldn't you be in heaven? And she said, I've been to heaven. God's a builder, not a jailer.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Now that is, I remember that story, and I think you can find that in America's Most Haunted or something, and it's by Scott Norman, and I can't remember the lady that co-authored it with him. But yeah, that's a really good, true story. And one of the interesting things about that is the lady or the spirit that possessed Patience Worth. Now, Patience Worth was out in the Midwest somewhere. I can't remember what state. It was like Wisconsin or
St. Louis.
Maybe St. Louis. It was somewhere out there.
Yeah.
But the spirit that inhabited her said she was killed by Indians in Virginia. So she was fairly close to us about the time period. That would have been the time of the Shawnee Wars, right along what then was the frontier.
Okay.
Some of my ancestors were murdered too.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Wow. I wrote that down. If you see the top of my head instead of my face, it's because I'm writing something down.
Yeah. It's a really good book.
Yeah, I'm going to have to check that out. Man. Well, guys, I really appreciate you guys coming on here. Is there anything else you want to cover? Any stories that jump out that you want to make sure that you get out, or you want to? Well, we can schedule something for next time too, because I plan on there being.
We might want to do that, because there's so many things that have happened, like especially in that house that I was telling you about, where something woke me up, and then we went back in it, or didn't wake me up. I went into sleep, but put its head on or hand on my head.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one real quick one time on that. Now, my grandparents were kind of funny. And I always joked and said it was because my family's been in the country for a long, long time. But if you go back far enough on my grandmother's side, she's basically Scottish.
Uh-huh.
And I always said that was why she, with all the legends of the witchcraft and all that stuff, which she didn't necessarily appreciate, being a good dyed-in-the-wool Southern Methodist. But anyway, and my grandfather, if you go back far enough, the Hagers are German. And the kind of cultural differences in those two. So I half jokingly said this was the reason, but my grandmother basically believed in everything. She knew all the stories of the banshees and the legends and all of that. She saw spirits, and all kinds of things. She believed in it. My grandfather, if the headless horseman rode through the living room waving his head, my grandfather would have just shook his head and said, it's time to get a doctor's appointment. and that's just the way they were.
Yeah.
Well, one day we had some company over visiting at that house, and all of a sudden we heard something, and this became something that happened fairly regularly, but this was the first time we heard it. We heard these big, heavy boot thuds coming up the stairs out of the basement. And shaking at the door. Now, at the time, there was me and my grandparents and a couple people over visiting, and we all heard it, just heavy boot thuds up those basement stairs and the door shaking. Well, Grandpa went and got a shotgun because he thought our basement wasn't completely below ground.
Right.
There was a above ground entrance. He thought somebody had broken the house. So he got a shotgun, went down. He searched the whole basement, turned all the lights on and checked everything. Didn't find anything, of course. And he came upstairs and put the gun away, locked the basement door, went over and sat down in the living room. I said, "What'd you find?" He said, "Nothing. There's nothing down there." I said, "What do you mean there's nothing down there? There's 5 of us sitting here. We all heard something pound up the steps and shake the door." He said, "Don't care. There's nothing down there." Not a thing. And he wouldn't hear it. And my grandmother just shook her head and she said, "Spirits." My grandfather said, "No such thing." And we went back to having our meeting and that was it. But that was just the way they were. She believed in everything. He believed in nothing.
Yeah.
Well, he believed in God, but he wasn't going to go beyond that.
Right.
That was God existed. He'd take care of everything, and nothing else needed to be worried about.
That's it. Yeah. He just stayed in his lane, right?
Yeah,
that's it. He wasn't comfortable with anything he couldn't shoot.
right.
My kind of guy.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate y'all coming on.
We appreciate you having us.
I'll probably put
We'd
this
love
show
to do it
out
again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll make this a recurring thing if you want to, because I know you guys have stories, and there's a lot that I know we didn't get into, but we'll definitely do this again. This show will probably be my break away from the Bigfoot stuff, because by the time this one airs, I'll have done like 7 or 8 Bigfoot shows in a row. So this is a breath of fresh air for me. I'm not supposed to be a Bigfoot podcast. I'm supposed to be, all encompassing kind of thing. So thank you guys.
Right. Well, I've never seen a Bigfoot, but I've had a lot of people that I trust tell me they've seen them, including Brian. And I keep trying to get Brian to take me on a Bigfoot hunt over near his house.
Yeah.
But so far I haven't gotten a chance to do that yet, but I think that would be either fun or deadly. I'm not sure which one.
The big guy was up near the house. I went out the other day to mow. The grass had gotten kind of high, and I could tell he'd been standing in front of a window because the vegetation had all been crushed. And there was a good foot impression there. Now, I took a picture, but honest to goodness, from the picture, you can't really tell. I should have put my foot in it, right?
Yeah.
But when I did put my foot in it, it was a good 6 inches longer than my size 13.
Oh, my God.
So it had to be the big guy, and he'd been there probably stooping, sneaking and looking in the window at night. They're curious.
Yeah. I thought it was so fun when we were on there. Oh, I thought it was fun. You probably got a little nervous, but when we were in the interview together, his dog starts going nuts, and he was, he's like, "Well, I'm gonna stand on the porch," because he was outside talking to me. And it sounded like something was creeping around his property then. That was a good one.
Really they creep around, and if the wind's right, you can smell them. And one night my wife got a real good whiff. He was probably standing right there at that same window. There's a box fan there at that window. She said to me the next morning, "What in the world happened?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "That smell." And I said, "What smell?" And it didn't even faze me. It woke her up. She said it smelled like rotten meat and skunk and poop and just all this stuff. She said it was rank.
Man, you know what it was.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, I'm gonna hop off here. If you guys have anything else come up or something strikes your mind later on, shoot me an email. Brian, give Earl my email too. That way, he can holler at me if it's the middle of the night or whatever. I don't care. I'll check it in the morning.
Okay.
But you guys have a good night. I'll send you both links to this show as soon as it records. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank y'all. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye-bye.